Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 97, Comfort Zone or Expansion, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Matt. I've got a topic to start us off today. I was talking with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about the this kind of phenomenon where we're pulled between our comfort zone and our, let's say, our greater potential. So you have this area where you know that you can perform really well, especially I think it's hard for people who are more successful. I see it much more strongly there. So it's like you know what to do, you know how to get results, it all works that way. There's this sense of potential we all have, I think, or most of us, or anyone who's a little bit driven to perform or to succeed in a way has a sense of their greater potential. And it's really hard to know which way to go. And if you add into the mix evolution, so life is moving forward anyway. My understanding is it's moving in the direction of our potential rather than our comfort zone. So, and my friend said, oh, that's like, he said, I know that really well. I've been in that position lots of time. It's like you have one foot on the wharf and one foot on the boat, and the boat is moving away from the wharf. And it's like, you don't know how to get on the boat and you don't know how to stay on the wharf. And you feel like the biggest risk is you're just going to fall into the water. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of this in the coming years, because I'm hearing from more and more people that whatever I used to do doesn't work anymore. Literally, like business people, successful business people coming along saying it doesn't work. I used to be able to do this and I can't do it anymore. Sometimes it's making them burn out. Sometimes their methods or their formulae or whatever are just not performing in the way that they used to. And they don't know what to do. And they feel called towards something, but it feels risky. And there you have the dilemma. Probably all of us experience that at times in our life.
I think that's just a natural part of the business journey, I've got to say. I can see that happen pretty much time and time again in business by business owners. So it's not I don't think it's a new phenomenon, is probably what I feel. Like what you described then, certainly the world is evolving, but it always evolves. And I think that we have got to make decisions along the way as to whether we're going to be prepared to evolve with it or not evolve with it. And that's what you're really talking about there, is that sort of the sense is that the world's going to continue on. You've got to make a decision about whether you're going to stay in that evolutionary stage or stay put. There's something that came to mind, which I always think about, that there's something in this for this conversation, is that I always see probably more men than women get to a certain age, and that's sort of the dress that they're happy with, and they end up in that dress for the rest of their life. So it usually happens in the age of about sort of maybe around that sort of 50s mark sort of type thing. So in their 50s, they get to a level of dress where they feel comfortable in. You know, it's contemporary for the time, but you'll see them 20 or 30 years later still wearing a similar sort of type clothing attire. And it's funny, and I believe that people will get to a certain stage in their life where they'll say, I now want to stay on the dock. Regardless of the fact that the boat is moving on, I'm going to stay on the dock because that's where I feel comfortable. So there's a lot of people that are making that decision. But typically most people make that sort of decision in business when they're secure enough to stay on the dock and they don't have to jump onto the boat. Okay, so there's that analogy that goes on there. But also, throughout life and throughout the business, there's always this flexing moment where you're going, oh, I've got to take that leap of faith as to whether I'm going to jump on the boat or whether I'm going to stay on the dock. You know you can't stay on the dock, okay, because business is evolving, the world's evolving, you know, and if you don't evolve, you're going to be left behind, okay? So I see that in every phase of business. But then I also see it where people get to a certain level where they actually consciously make the decision not to jump on the boat. And I think that comes with security, and maybe that's financial security is probably the major part, or just being comfortable with where they are. They don't feel like they need to evolve at the same pace as what the world is evolving at. So I kind of see that, yes, that is a case. And I do probably think it's heightened at the moment, because I remember, you know, thinking back a couple of years ago that the strategies that used to work from a marketing point of view, are out of date in 6 months' time. I think they're out of date almost faster nowadays. So the things that worked 6 months ago aren't working today. And so therefore I can see this hyper change, and therefore that creates this massive level of anxiety because you're in this constant change. And when you're in constant change, that creates a lot of situations where people feel uncomfortable, because what you're talking about is comfort zone, really. I feel comfortable staying on the dock, but the boat's leaving. Am I prepared to jump on the boat? Am I prepared to stay on the dock? And that sort of life-changing, or that moment-by-moment changing decision is a really tough one. And I see it happen time and time again for business owners, for my clients, for people, for myself. I've had to make those strong decisions over the past. But then I think some people do eventually stay on the dock, okay, at some point in time. And they're saying, that's enough. I'm not evolving at this pace anymore. I'm happy to stay where I'm at. So I think we also have to be conscious that it depends on where the person's at in their life, in their business journey, as to how they feel about that being split between the dock and the boat is probably what came to me when you were talking about this particular situation.
It's interesting that you immediately raised that about men, because I can see that a lot of women of just about any age, like in their 60s, even in their 70s, are jumping on the boat. And that might be because they are less secure at one level, because definitely women are way less secure than men financially. We know that statistically. So that might be part of the reason. But yes, I see the discomfort is greater in men. Like if I can generalize, and I don't know how true this is because I haven't really looked at it very carefully, but generally what I find with men is the pain of things not working anymore is really strong. I think it seems easier for women to jump, maybe because they didn't have so much that was working before, or that they seem to be shifting. And I do get the sense that we talk a lot about, this rising feminine energy, that it really is. So probably women do feel a strength growing within them with that. I noticed that. So, yeah.
My references weren't about men and women. It was just more about dress. It was an analogy. But when you talk about it, I don't really have any level of scientific knowledge on the difference between men and women at this particular stage that we're talking about. I do see my comments around business owners and around having to make these difficult decisions between staying on the dock or moving onto the boat is actually non-specific to gender. You just have to make these decisions regardless of the type thing. And I think that we get to certain levels of comfortability and are happy to stay on the dock compared to jumping. That's probably my overarching statement around it. And it usually comes down to risk profile. It comes down to, what's the drive and the desire for you to jump compared to stay. So it's that risk reward aspect comes into it as well, because if it's so much of a risk, that's why people probably won't want to jump. But then it comes down to risk reward. If people actually go, you know what, I'm so motivated to jump, I don't care if I fall into the water, because what I'm going from is not as exciting or not as what I want compared to jumping onto the particular boat. I'm prepared to risk. So I see the gap, okay, and the water as risk. And so therefore people either are prepared to jump or they're not prepared to jump. And it's a risk that sits in between. Because if you stay on the dock, you're probably not necessarily going to achieve all the things you want to achieve, but you're not going to fall in the water either. You might not have an exciting life or maybe prosperous life, and the world might pass you by, but you haven't risked things. And I think that's really the analogy with this bit that you're talking about. It's the gap in between. It's the leap of faith that really, and you have to make a conscious decision on whether you want to stay or go, what you're prepared to lose and give up by jumping.
Yeah, and I think the risk of staying on the wharf is probably a kind of hidden risk. It's a risk that people don't assess. I suspect that that's where people get sick. That's where so many people when they after they retire, for example, their health doesn't get better, it gets worse because they've made that decision. What I was thinking while you were speaking then is of the loss in a way of talent. I might have mentioned this before on the podcast, I'm not sure, but I came across this little piece of research. I have not checked it. I don't know if it's accurate, but it said that people are most effective in their 60s, in their whole life, and they're second most effective in their 70s. And I see so many people feeling like by the time they're in their 60s, they're finished. And I always look at them and I think, wow, you're beginning to get useful now. That you've actually got something that you could share. Rather than just trying to make money to keep your family together, you've done that. You now actually have knowledge and experience that you could share and help to make the world a better place. And, you know, let's face it, we really need all the, especially in the business context, we need all the business experience that we can possibly get in order to do that. And yet people then kind of leave. I mean, you know, some people go on and become board directors and this and that, but...
Well, it's actually interesting you talk about that, because I agree with you that you know, people in there, they talk about, you know, in your 20s, you're starting out, your 30s, you're sort of climbing the ladder. This is in the corporate world. Your 40s, you sort of start to get there. And your 50s, you reap the reward for all the effort you put in, sort of, especially from a financial capacity perspective. That's kind of the way that there's a term for it, but I can't remember the different stages. But it's interesting, in my profession, in the accounting profession, there was compulsory retirement for partners in accounting firms. We used to be at 55. Okay, so it's not just what you want; it was forced upon you. Now it's, for some firms, I've heard it's now 60 or 62 or 65. But there's actually compulsory retirement. What does it actually say to you as an individual to say, well, we don't think you're actually useful enough anymore at this particular age, because you've hit an age and now therefore you must retire. So it's actually seen to be not just an individual, but seen to be a thing, which I'm really perplexed by. And I've got to say, if I would be pretty disappointed if I worked for an organisation that had compulsory retirement, which we don't, because we get to make the decisions in it anyway. But I firmly believe that you are more useful in your 50s and 60s. The only other thing that comes up for me in relation to that is that, you know, they talk about, so the young tech brigade that are coming through, you know, the young entrepreneurs that are coming through, and the young entrepreneurs, you know, won't gravitate towards the more senior experienced person because they're in a tech cool sort of type space. There's that dynamic that goes on as well, which I don't necessarily think that that's right either. But the other thing that came up for me the other day, I was talking to demographics, and we're talking about the fact that typically as an advisor, you will advise people typically 5 years younger and 5 years older than yourself. You don't typically advise people that are 10, 15 and 20 years younger or older than yourself. So there's something in that aspect of it as well that suggests that, you know, there is something around age that does mean that you will be more relevant and functional for a particular group of people compared to not. So it is something interesting in that dynamic as well.
I feel that, like, I know that older people can be really old-fashioned and very annoying for younger people, especially if they're kind of on the dock, but somehow maybe trying to be on the boat, but they're really on the dock. But I feel that there's also a lot of wisdom in older people that is very much ignored, and that doing business without that is a form of madness, actually, really.
It's a form of madness. And I look at, you know, I start to look at politicians as well and think, I'm now starting to get to the age in early 50s where I see these politicians and leaders of our countries that are younger than me, and I go, and I start to scratch my head a little bit because they don't have the wisdom and experience that some of the older people have. But then you see American presidents in their 70s and moving towards 80s as well. So they obviously embrace, you know, the more senior. So it's really interesting to see, leaders of countries at different ages. And look, at the end of the day, age shouldn't matter. It should be based around experience and wisdom and those sorts of things. But it was just interesting that the conversation that we started with around the dock and the boat and the risk in between, we've moved into age, because I think there is an element of that. But really, I agree with you. It comes down to a mindset that if you're on the dock, but thinking you're on the boat, and that's why you become not relevant, you lose your currency. For the people that are on the boat, they're not going to listen to you if you're on the dock. Okay, so there's obviously a dynamic shift in relation to that. But I still think that there's this element about you making choice based on risk and return as to whether you're prepared to make that leap or not make that leap, regardless of what age you're at.
So the interesting thing, I think, because in a way that this whole thing really is around potential. In the end, it's like, what is that sense of potential, or what is the sense of contribution that I have that kind of sings inside me, rather than have I made myself secure, or have I got enough money to take care of all this and that? Like, what is it that, is there something that's pulsing inside me saying, I want to do this, or there's something more? And that probably has nothing to do, or very little to do, with financial security. Financial security can make it safer for you to do it, but it also can put a blanket on you doing it for all the reasons that you've already talked about. So I think part of the point of this is that we have to open up the conversation. Like when you described the 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s, and the 50s is you kind of reap the financial rewards for everything you've put in. That's the result of a culture that looks as the financial rewards as though they're the most important thing. And they're really only a small part of it, because in the end, think of all the skill and knowledge that you have developed. Think of all the contribution that becomes possible if you share that. That's much more fulfilling. And if you do it well, and you're already good at making money, you're going to carry on making money anyway. But no one very successful ever said that making money was fulfilling in its own right. They always say that it's like what you do for other people, what you contribute, that makes that. So it feels very important to bring that in and to open that up. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was talking to a young woman who's a carer at the moment, and he was just kind of inspiring her. She's got that kind of natural caring and healing type of ability, and he was just inspiring her about, how she could follow the things that she really wants to do and longs to do, and not to be so afraid of it. And I think that there's going to be a lot more of that happening. The world is so very uncertain that people will question more and more, why do I do all these things if they're not really producing what they're supposed to produce, and maybe free themselves up to make some braver decisions. They might be crazy decisions.
Maybe there's another thing at play here as well, is that you're standing on the dock and you've got the boat leaving, but you're not too sure there's another boat going to come along that's better.
A lot of people do that.
Right?
Yeah.
And so therefore, you feel like you've got one foot on the boat and one foot on shore, but you're not too sure which one you're going to jump onto, because you're dealing with, you're trying to assess the risk and the reward and the impact and those sorts of things. But are you still got one foot on the dock and you haven't made that full commitment, because you're going, hang on a minute, is this boat the right boat for me to be on, or is the next one coming along the better boat to be on? And I see that sort of, it's almost a paralyzing in terms of its analysis, because you'll never know what the next boat is and that's what you're talking about there. It's about, living your life, as opposed to sort of always questioning, what's next, and should I worry about it, or should I, work through this process of, just waiting for the next best thing that comes along. And I see that often.
Yeah, my Chinese teacher always used to say, don't calculate. And I really understand what she meant. She's like, don't calculate money. It was like, don't calculate the fine details of money. Am I going to win or lose here or there? And I think don't calculate in that kind of way. Like there's a bigger thing going on than the calculations that we can do with our minds. They might have a place to play, but they're very small. What I've seen is that if people get onto the boat, if there is a bigger or better boat coming along, if you get onto the boat, you can then get onto a bigger boat. If you stay on the wharf, it's really hard. Usually the next boat doesn't come into the wharf, it comes alongside the boat that's already moving.
Which is good analogy to keep you moving forward and keep jumping onto boats, if that's the way that works. But I think our minds often play tricks on us to say, well, actually, no, it's not going to get to that particular boat. It's going to still dock, and therefore I have to make sure I'm on the dock to actually jump on the boat. So these are analogies that, you know, that go on in our brain constantly, because these are the daily decisions that we have to make about our businesses and which is the right pathway to move forward, which is the right boat to jump onto. And I was talking to a client earlier today around just this concept of trusting the universe is on your side. That, you know, you and I have discussed this many times about saying, well, if I was meant to be on that boat, I should be on the boat and let the boat go and see what actually happens from there. It's not going to send me off down a waterfall, for example. It's just going to keep sailing on. And if there is a waterfall coming, another boat takes me somewhere else. But it's just this trust element that maybe the reason why you've got one foot on the dock and one foot on the boat is you don't trust that that is the right boat to be on.
Don't trust yourself.
That's really the core of it.
Don't trust yourself. Don't trust life.
That's right.
I was wondering, like, how do you make decisions what boat to be on? How do you do it yourself? It's interesting because I suspect people have different ways of doing that.
My personal way is not necessarily something I advocate for. It's probably analysis by paralysis.
Or paralysis by analysis.
Thank you. I knew that I had it around the wrong way. I am a person that will assess all options before I make. I'm talking about bigger decisions, not everyday decisions, sort of thing. I've learned to trust more as I've gotten older, as I've gotten more experience, as I've gotten to know the teachings, you know, of you, Sarah, and other people around this particular concept of trust, and intuition and gut feel and limbic part of your brain and all that sort of type of stuff, that I'm now probably a lot more efficient with the decision-making process. But I still like the concept of analysis. I like data and information to be able to make a decision. And I like to talk to people. So I'm an outwardly talking style of person. So if I need to make a decision about something, I will go and seek counsel and sounding boards from people, as opposed to somebody who, an ex-business partner of mine was very much went internal to make a decision, where I'd go external, is the way I talk about it. And I would talk to people. So mine is about talking it out, because I get clarity when I speak. I get clarity around looking at data. And then once I've weighed all that up, I still tend to go with my gut instinct and my gut feel. That's my formula for making decisions.
That's quite thorough. You've got different things. I talk quite a lot, but I don't really listen to people. I talk so that I can listen to myself. And the reason I do that is so that I can feel. I feel when I'm talking about options, it's like trying on different clothes to see how they look. I feel into it as I speak about it. It's like, what does that feel like? Does that feel like a good life to be living? And if it feels good, that's cool. Then I can compare different options. So how does this life feel? How does that life feel? Just by talking about them, seeing which one feels better. But, you know, often it's not a one's better and the other's worse. It's not like a yes or no answer. It's like, this one's really good in this way and this one's really good in that way. And so then I start to look at either how can is there a way I can bring both together, all the good bits together? Or is there a way that I can, where there's a bit that doesn't feel so good here, I start to kind of talk into ways of making it better so that feels really good. Like, how can I make that one feel as good as possible? And so it's kind of like
It's
teasing it out
similar.
in this way all the time. You've seen me do it anyway, but
Yeah, and I see you do it, and I experience it, and I'm very similar to that in terms when I say talk it out, I do listen to myself, and I joke with an ex-business partner of mine that I used to walk into his office and talk. He'd say nothing and nod and smile and make a gesture every now and again, and then I'd come up with the answer and say it to him, and he'd just laugh, and then I'd walk out of his room. So I used to call it the room of truth, so to speak, because of the fact that it just allowed me to talk it out, talk your thought out rather than being inside your head. That's all true, but there's still this concept that somebody can help sometimes get you there faster by asking the right question of you. I notice this too in terms of even when we have conversations, you and I, is that there'll be a moment in time where I'll ask the right question at the right time, or vice versa for me, that then helps get that clarity. Because really, at the end of the day, it's about clarity. Okay. And yes, if there was a black and white answer, it'd be pretty easy for most people to get the answer, but there's not. There's always a that's great and that's not so great, but that's great and that's not so great on either side. But it comes back to this concept that we've spoken about a lot and that you talk about a lot, which I practice over and over again, is that I'll have that or something better, right? So therefore, it's this concept that you'll pick one over the other. Okay, you'll pick the dock or the boat, one over the other. And if you pick the boat and you still got concerns and reservations about staying on the dock, you'll say, I'll have that or something better. And it just liberates you, I think, is the word that I'm thinking of there, in terms of this decision to say, well, it's not, I'm choosing this particular pathway because I think it's the right way to go, even though I know that potentially it could be not necessarily good, but it's kind of like you're hedging your bets to say better or something better, because that means maybe the next boat that comes along is the something better.
yeah, or it's almost the opposite of hedging your bets. It's opening up to the greater possibilities, which is kind of where we started, is the potential piece. And I realize that that's something that is very important for me, and I look around and I see that it's not so important for other people. So I don't want to make a judgment that everyone should be like me, or that there are rules about this, that our potential is the most important thing. I've really been questioning that recently. Is that a cultural thing, or is there really something in the way that human beings are called towards maybe a contribution or a sense of purpose? It's really hard to pull it apart, but definitely for some of us, that feeling of being drawn towards something that is better for us and is better for not just for us but better for the world, that's definitely what would get me onto a boat for sure.
Something that came to mind that I watched last night, and it could be completely random, and if it is, just tell me to stop talking, because it's just such a, but you talk about moving forward, or you talk about making these decisions, okay, for a particular reason. And I was watching a documentary last night on television that talks about some of the weird and wonderful festivals in the world. And they were over, and why it came to mind is because, you know, your home country, they were talking about Gloucester, I think it is. It's a cheese
Glastonbury.
rolling competition down
Oh.
a hill. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, not Glastonbury.
And
Yeah.
anyway, so they roll the cheese down this really, really steep hill, and then everyone runs down this hill to get to the bottom of it to be the first one. And they're never going to beat the cheese, but they'll end up being the first one down there. And they're interviewing this young lady who just looked like this peaches and cream, lovely young girl who's won it 3 times in a row. And it's brutal. These people are looking like they're going to break their neck running down this, and they fall over, and I don't know if you've seen it before, but anyway, this young girl, she's actually won it 3 times, and she was going for the 4th time, which would have made her the world record holder of running down this particular hill and trying to kill herself. And she showed all of her scars with her, you know, she showed her dislocated shoulder that's never going to be right ever again, and that sort of stuff. But it was like this drive to do something completely crazy for no particular reason other than the fact that it was there, it was a challenge, and she wanted to do it because it made her feel good about herself. So there's something in this, like, I couldn't get my head around the fact that people would risk, you know, killing themselves almost, or really injuring themselves quite dramatically, running down a hill for the accolade of self, you know, that they're happy with what they did. So I think about that and think about some people are just going to always jump on the boat because they actually love the thrill of jumping on the boat. And then there's some people that are going to go, oh, I don't know about the boat. I better stay on the dock. So there's got to be some sort of, assessment around your risk profile as to whether you're the jumper or whether you're somebody who's not prepared to jump either. And I think we have to also be mindful of that and honor that at the end of the day, because if you're not a jumper, if you're not a risk taker and you're doing that, and that pushes you into a high level of anxiety, for example, and you can get equally sick being on the boat than not being on the boat because you push yourself too far. I think we actually have to be conscious of that element too.
Yeah, it may be that we need the balance of different types of people. It feels to me like there's a whole topic opening up here. I was starting to talk with Nico, my husband, about this morning, about why is it that we end up doing the things. I was asking him, where did that impulse come, first of all, as something that's important for him now? Where did that show up in his life for the first time? Why did he start reading parapsychology when he was 16? No background to be reading that kind of thing. And then, goes on and gets really fascinated by the mysteries of life. He grew up in a life where you would never expect that. What happened? How did that connect up for him to become one of the leading interests of his entire life? Why, what are the signals, or what are the impulses that get us onto a track? Because that's what makes each of us unique. In the end, it's probably not one boat. Everyone's finding their boat. And somebody who might stay on the wharf for a while, but then there's another boat that's going to come, which is the right boat for them. We are all on the wharf some of the times, and we're all on a boat some of the time, really. So we don't have time to talk about all of that, but it's really fascinating. And I think especially in these days where people are very much questioning their purpose and how do I choose what I do?
Yeah, because I think that what we're really talking about there, if we go back to that, the person you're talking about that feels like they're split between the wharf and the boat, and they're in between, and they're feeling like you said that they'll probably end up in the water, or that's the way that they feel like they're going to end up being, is that really we're back to this whole concept of maybe that wasn't, if they're questioning whether they've got one foot and one foot the other, and they're really strongly questioning, they can't make a decision either way. You have to really question whether they should have the foot on the boat in the first place. If they can't actually make that decision and they feel split and their legs are going out from underneath them and they're going to fall into the water in that analogy, then maybe they should have got that foot off that boat pretty quickly, because maybe that boat isn't right for them. And that's kind of the feeling that I get when I think about this vision of somebody who's stepped on a boat and gone, hang on a minute, I can't pull my other foot off this and I'm just going to split and I'm going to fall. That wasn't that for me. What that screams of that's not the right boat for them.
Yeah, whereas for me, having grown up on boats, nobody showed them how to put one foot into the right place on the boat so that then the other foot could follow. And then the boat's stable when you get on. They've stood on the front of the boat, which makes you immediately feel really, really wobbly. And you're in a very difficult position there. So we could play with the analogy forever, but deeper exploration of purpose and potential and decisions and choices is definitely on the cards, I think, for a lot of people at the moment. So I feel we've just touched the surface here, but it's an important topic. One to be.
I agree, and I also agree that this is the moment in time where, and maybe that's because a lot of the people that I know and associate with, whether they're clients, business owners, whether they're friends, are in probably their 40s, 50s, and 60s, so to speak. Oh, I've got kids as well that are in their teens and 20s, but I think everybody's questioning that right now, given what we're going through still with a pandemic. Because it forces you to question everything. It forces you to question, what is the future? What am I doing? Is this what I should be doing? And so certainly, I've sensed that we've just come back from obviously being on a break over sort of the festive season, and I've seen a really strong sense of, I don't know whether I really want to go back to it. There's been that. staying on the conversation maybe then and saying, I want a boat to turn up, but they're not too sure what boat to turn up or when it's coming. Sure, we've talked a lot about boats and docks today, haven't we? But I think we're all questioning boats and docks and which ones to be on and where to go to for fulfillment and purpose. So I think it's a very powerful topic to be discussing at the moment.
Yeah, well, thank you for opening it up. At least we opened it up a little bit today, perhaps in a slightly different way from how we have before.
Thanks.
You've been listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. If you'd like some insight into the spirit in which you do business, a great place to start is by looking at your relationship with money. Find out more by taking the Money Scorecard at moneyscorecard.app, and we'll be back next week.